By the time Pompeii was buried by Vesuvius in 79 AD, the city was as old as Moscow or Timbuktu are today, and nearly twice as old as any American city. Although some of the buildings here in the Forum, like the Temple of Vespasian, were new, the basilica was almost 200 years old by the time it was buried. So was the Capitolium, the temple at the head of the Forum, toward which we're now looking. As we'll see in a moment, some of the city's houses date back to Pompeii's mysterious pre-Roman history, and a few buildings were as old as anything in Rome itself. Let's start with the House of the Faun, Pompeii's largest mansion. It was built in the early 2nd century BC, 2.5 centuries before the eruption, at a time when Pompeii was not yet under the direct control of the Roman Republic, and the town's dominant language was still Oscan, a distant relative of Latin. Remarkably, the decoration of the House of the Faun remained almost unchanged for more than 200 years. Here in the atrium, first-style frescoes, made to resemble marble paneling, remained in place, and a grand old atrium lay behind them. To a Roman of 79 AD, this would have looked extremely old-fashioned, like a colonial house or English country mansion. This is the house of the surgeon, probably the oldest house in Pompeii. It's at least a century older than the House of the Faun, and may date to the 4th century BC, a fact inferred by archaeologists from the massive masonry of its walls. By the time of the eruption, it was dilapidated and partly abandoned. Part of the floor had caved in, and posts had been inserted into the atrium to support a collapsing roof. Fittingly enough, the oldest house in Pompeii was one of the first to be excavated. It's been exposed to the elements for more than 250 years, and as a result, almost all of its decoration has vanished. Just behind here, and unfortunately closed to visitors, is a small house named for its most remarkable feature, an Etruscan column set up in the 6th century BC. Originally, the column was freestanding. It may have carried a statue, and likely stood in a sacred grove. Centuries later, when housing covered the area, the column was left in place, either as a curiosity or on account of its sanctity. The Temple of Apollo, located next to the Forum, stands in the southwest part of Pompeii, what was almost certainly the oldest part of the city. The first temple on this site dated to the 6th century BC. At that time, the region around Pompeii was disputed between the Greeks who had settled on the Bay of Naples and the Etruscans who controlled much of the interior. It's unclear which of those peoples was in the ascendancy at the time of this temple's construction. Although it was rebuilt several times, most recently after the earthquake of '62, it retained its original shape to the end. This is probably the oldest building in Pompeii. Although it's usually just called the Doric Temple, it seems to have been dedicated to Minerva and Hercules. It dates to the 6th century BC. Built at a time when Pompeii lay within the cultural sphere of the Greek colonies on the Bay of Naples, it was a Greek-style temple, completely encircled by colonnades. It was set in a prominent place, visible to ships sailing into the mouth of the Sarno River. But by the time of the eruption, it was already a ruin, a legacy of a past that few Pompeians remembered.